It was a stormy night. Everybody in my family was doing whatever they might feel like doing. I was in my room, sitting in front of the television, my folks were in the floor, observing some satire show, and my sister was playing computer games higher up. I, as a rule, delighted in blustery evenings like this, since it caused me to feel loosened up. I was loose until there was a gigantic beat on my window. I bounced up and looked external. There was somebody outside my window, yet the huge measure of downpour pouring down the window sort of obscured his face. He began beating at my window. It seemed like he was shouting for help. I opened the window simply a break, and he shouted and drove me, and I'm harmed. The downpour was so clearly. I needed to shout at him to come around front. Then I shot my window. I ran outside to the lounge to let my father know that is a man who is by all accounts in trouble and shouting for help outside, and afterward came the thumps and yells for help outside our front entryway. My father was going to open the front entryway. However, I halted him. I said, "Stand by," on the grounds that I didn't know whether it was smart when the telephone rang, and on the television, it showed the guest ID of our nearby neighbor. My father rushed to get it when I heard him say, "No fucking way." I realized something was off base. He hung up the telephone and said, "Avoid the entryway." He didn't make sense of why he just went to the window to look at the front stoop. There is where he said he saw a person hunched down, beating on the entryway, holding some sort of enormous sharp device. My father hollered through the front entryway at the man to disappear before the police arrived. Then he really got on the telephone with the police. Ultimately, the man outside surrendered, and he vanished. The following time, we checked when my father was on the telephone with a neighbor. He let my father know that he saw some destitute-looking person scrounging through his shed and emerged with an enormous slashing hatchet. The police found the frenzied man meandering around the roads, and it made it in the paper a couple of days after the fact. I used to keep an eye on my high school years when I was 13. I minded a 7-year-old kid named Liam once his folks left me. With few guidelines are there than to arrange sandwich for supper and not let him go in their room. They additionally left me with a fascinating remark that Liam's strained act unique in relation to different children, and that he'll converse with himself or his non-existent companion, particularly when he played with his toys. So, it was noontime pouring external. I was observing some old crash show that used to be on television in the mid-2002s. Liam was on the floor playing with his toys that were dissipated across the floor. Liam continued to utilize the name Jessica. He would carry on like he was playing with another youngster who was sitting before him, one of his toys that were sitting across the room from him, and acted all of a sudden. I just found it unusual in light of the fact that the toy was one of those little shape-like things with the wrench where you pull it down. And some mimicked moving dashing foundation came up on the screen. It was the sort of toy that would require work to enact, and there was initiated without help from anyone else. I asked Liam how that was conceivable. He'd taken a gander at me and said, "Jessica is playing with it. I need to just own it." Was a little upsetting hearing him say that I got the toy and switched it off that evening in the last hour, trusting that his folks will return. I was in the restroom cleaning up when there was a thump at the entryway. "Liam," I said. I opened the entryway. Liam wasn't there. I investigated the lobby for Liam. One of the entryways toward the finish of the corridor began to squeak open gradually, like actually leisurely. I switched out the lights of the washroom and strolled into the room, hoping to see Liam messing about, attempting to frighten me. Rather, Liam was perched on the bed in the most distant corner of the room, taking a gander at me. I asked him who just pushed open the entryway. "Jessica." He said, "Now really blew a gasket." I went to lift Liam up off the bed and carried him to the lounge where I spent the remainder of my shift until his folks returned. I didn't make reference to any of the strange things that occurs yet when they contacted me to watch Liam again. Half a month after the fact, I never got back to them. I experienced childhood in Phoenix for the initial 13 years of my life. Our area wasn't the best, specifically in light of the fact that it was a region that the Crips were known to live in. On the off chance that you don't have a clue, about the Crips are individuals from one of the greatest Phoenix road groups. My closest companion, who I generally called Patrick, resided 2 entryways down. We had different companions, obviously. However, we would frequently hang out. He and I, we'd, for the most part, ride our bicycles together in and out of town or play computer games, simply essential childish stuff. When we were 12, we were trekking around the local one evening and chose to visit a notable deserted house. It had been uninhabited for a long time on the grounds that nobody would accept it. For reasons unknown, when we pulled up on our bicycles to the front of the house, Patrick guides it toward the window and said, "Look." I pushed my bicycle somewhat nearer to the window and zeroed in my vision on it. I could see somebody looking through the window. I was unable to know if they were taking a gander at us or not. Yet it was certainly an individual's face sitting between the shades. It was very unusual, considering the spot had been obscure for a really long time. We gazed for longer than we ought to have, maybe and seen something different that was peculiar. The individual didn't move their face at all. We crawled somewhat nearer onto the unfilled carport. Truly, after drawing nearer, it seemed, by all accounts, to be a Halloween embellishment or something like a phony head. This implied somebody had slipped into the house to put it there. Patrick and I, being the naughty children we used to be, incubated a plan to slip in through the back in some way and look at the put. We concealed our bicycles on the house behind a congested shrub, then, at that point, slipped into the yard. Shockingly, the secondary passage was, at that point, opened. Yet when we came to think about it, wasn't so much that. Astounding, considering it appears somebody had previously broken in to put that phony head there. He ventured into the house, yet we would have rather not turn the lights on and uncover the way that we were in the house. It was dim in there, yet not totally dark, so we could clear our path through the house. We got to the floor first, since we needed to look at that phony head thing at the window. It smelled truly horrible there, however, and got the head from the windowsill and quickly dropped it and shouted. I dropped it, not on the grounds that it was shockingly weighty, but since it additionally felt like genuine skin. I saw a dim fluid spilling out from the lower part of the head that was currently on the floor. It was blood. It was a genuine human head. There were 2 breaks in the roof above us. Patrick and I took a gander at one another with our mouths hanging open. We ran for the secondary passage and got back on our bicycles to get the damnation out of there. Anybody in our nearby region learned pretty soon that the head had a place with a survivor of the Crips, who evidently positioned the head there as some sort of message. I don't think anybody knew the full story yet. There was a decent opportunity. Whoever put that head there was still in the house, in light of the fact that Patrick and I both heard breaks in the roof above us, as though somebody was coming first floor. I've forever been an outrageous sports individual since I was little. Hiking, parasailing, scuba diving. However, I've forever been a devoted skier. I'd go upstate skiing no less than multiple times a season, some of the time with companions. Some of the time alone, my companion, who all cock you consented to come upstate and go setting up camp with me, so we could do some boondocks. Skiing, which is fundamentally skiing in the backwoods on marks or on watched regions beyond a ski resort's limits. It was a 3-hour drive, then a fair measure of going romping to get to where the slopes were. I left my truck at the lower part of a respectable-looking region, loaded with slopes. Yet, I additionally halted there since I couldn't actually drive out a lot. Additionally, given that there were an excessive number of trees, Hugh and I then continued to empty the rear of my truck of all our stuff, including ski stuff and setting up camp hardware. Then we climbed about a quarter mile, which was a staggering measure of work with all the stuff we were conveying. We tracked down an ideal spot to fix up camp close to the lower part of an upslope and in a cycle of a clearing between the trees, setting up the tent and emptying our camping beds and gear, and such was primary goal. When that was all done, we fired our climb up the slope to scout the region. We did a respectable measure of climbing, yet we likewise got a ton of skiing in at one point. You and I lost each other while skiing down a greater slope. I expected I'd meet him at the base or simply find him at last. I checked the walkie-talkie just to check whether he'd responded to it, yet he didn't, which implied he was presumably as yet going downhill eventually. While I was strolling with my skis at the lower part of the slope, I ran into somebody, another skier. He sounded cordial under a ski cover, asking me where the best slopes are and assuming that we were enjoying nature and such. He had his skis lashed to his orange knapsack. I highlighted the slope I just skied down and furthermore pointed toward the path we set up for business. He said he and his better half were attempting to track down a decent spot to camp out close to others and inquired as to whether I could lead him to my camping area. However much I truly didn't have any desire to trip as far as possible. Back there, I believed I must be a decent Samaritan and help this man and his better half. I pulled out my walkie once more and said into the speaker to signal that I was returning to the... A tad, I began to lead the one who was behind me, when unexpectedly I began getting some static from one more end on the walkie. It appears somebody, likely Q, was attempting to converse with me, yet the association was nothing I could do about that. Aside from return to this slope subsequently, it took a respectable measure of climbing and casual discussion with the man before we arrived at the camping area. I pivoted to him and grinned under my ski veil, which I understood in a flash was futile. He sounded exceptionally grateful for he and his better half, and I at long last asked him, "Where is your significant other?" He didn't answer. He began to walk nearer to me at first. I barely cared about it, yet for reasons unknown, something about his skis and rucksack just struck me. They had a place with L. Briefly, I believed, is this L, is he tricking me? Yet it was unimaginable. The voice was excessively unique in relation to L. The man was a couple of simple feet from me as of now, and he was hustling to a really scary methodology. I overreacted and hopped into the tent to search for my flare firearm in my sack. The man snatched my leg, which was standing out from the tent, and afterward, I felt a sharp extreme shiver in my leg like a serious electric shock, followed by a copying heat feeling. I shouted in torment as I just figured out how to take out the flare weapon, shove to the A side the way to the vent, and focusing on the man, he promptly upheld with his hands up high. And that is the point at which I saw the blade dove profound into my leg. I requested the man to let me know where my companion was. He addressed rapidly, saying close to the lower part of the slope he found me at. I advised the man to stop while I called 911 to demand a prompt salvage. Yet the man took off effectively while I was on the telephone. There wasn't a lot I could do with one single flare discharge. I felt like I was holding up there neglected with my draining leg, everlastingly, until at last the consoling sound of a salvage helicopter dipped above, and I fired my flare firearm. I can't really accept that I was truly gotten by a helicopter, which I found my companion laying in the snow in the slope. He was oblivious, and he had likewise been ventured 2 times in the leg. Then, at that point, looted. He had a go at talking me through the walkie-talkie while he was blacking out. Yet the association was terrible. We both went to the emergency clinic, yet we're fine today. Friends, if you liked what I said, then do like it. If you have not subscribed the channel, then subscribe. There are many more interesting stories like this in my channel. Do listen to them too, and thank you for listening to this story till here.